It was a cold morning in Toronto when Ethan, a middle-aged millionaire with tired eyes and a perpetually serious expression, walked down Main Street after a frustrating meeting. He was used to running down the sidewalks hurriedly with long steps and focused eyes, almost without noticing what or who was passing by him. His days were driven by the clock and commitments, and his thoughts were always on the next project, the next investment. However, that morning, something unusual caught his attention. A little girl standing on the corner, hugging a carefully folded sheet of paper. She was about 8 years old. With deep-set eyes and a disarming simplicity in her face, she was well dressed, but her eyes conveyed an unusual seriousness for a child. When Ethan approached, she stepped forward and, with a shy gesture, held out the sheet toward him. "Please, sir, this is for you," whispered the girl, as her soft voice blended with the noise of the city. Confused, Ethan hesitated. He was used to people asking for autographs or favors, but never a child handing him a letter without explanation. Curious, he took the sheet and thanked her, without realizing the importance of that gesture. However, something about that letter seemed to weigh heavily on his hand, as if it carried a secret that he was not yet ready to reveal. As soon as Ethan got into his car, curious, he opened the letter that the little girl had given him. The paper was plain, with small finger marks, probably from her anxious hands. As he began reading, his expression changed, as if with each line a new mystery was revealed. "Dear Lord, I don't know if you believe in miracles, but my mother always says that God puts the right people in the right places when we need them most. I don't know you, but I know that, in some way, you can help." The handwriting was childish, with slightly crooked letters, but the message carried a rare depth. "My name is Sophie, and I'm 8 years old. My mother is very sick, and the doctors say she needs expensive treatment. I know you are an important man and have many commitments, but if you can help save her, my mother, I promise I will do whatever it takes to repay her. I just don't want to be without her." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't been emotional about anything in a long time. Routine and business had hardened him. But those words awakened something dormant within him, something he thought he had lost. He remembered his childhood, his own mother, who raised him alone, and how he had sworn that one day he would have the power and money to never depend on anyone. There, in the silence of his car, Ethan was overcome by a whirlwind of contradictory feelings: compassion, resistance, and a slight hope. For years he had been surrounded by people interested only in what he could offer materially, so his distrust grew almost by instinct. But Sophie Sophie didn't seem interested in money. She just wanted her mother back. He took a deep breath and closed the letter, placing it carefully in the inside pocket of his coat. A part of him said to forget it, not to get involved. But another part, perhaps the same one that had once dreamed of doing something meaningful in the world, insisted that he do something. That night, when he arrived at his luxurious apartment, he couldn't get the letter out of his head. He tried to work, answer emails, organized the next day's meetings, but the image of that little girl with her big, hopeful eyes tormented him. Finally, he took out his cell phone and decided to call his assistant. "Matthew, I need you to do a search tomorrow morning. I want information about a girl named Sophie. No, I don't know her last name. She handed me a letter on the street today, and mentioned that her mother is very sick. I need all the details I can find. Matthew hesitated, clearly surprised. Ethan rarely got involved in personal matters, especially those of strangers, but his tone was firm and decisive, so Matthew simply replied that he would begin the search immediately. That night, Ethan had a restless sleep. In his dreams, he saw the little girl extending the letter, but instead of handing it over, she pulled it closer, as if it were a prayer that he had not yet understood. The dawn advanced, and he woke up every hour, with a racing heart and a restlessness that he barely understood. It was as if Sophie had placed a seed in his heart, a seed he didn't know he needed. The next morning, as Ethan looked out over the city's icy skyline, he felt something bigger was about to begin. He just didn't know if he was ready for what came next. The next morning, Ethan barely had time to drink his coffee before he received a call from Matthew, his assistant, who seemed more anxious than usual. "Mr. Ethan, I found some information. Sophie Carter is an elementary school student, and her mother, Lily Carter, has been frequently admitted to St. Mary's Hospital here in Toronto. Records show that she is undergoing treatment for a rare disease and aggressive. It appears that her health insurance only covers a portion of the costs, and the family is facing serious financial difficulties," Matthew reported. His voice wavering, Ethan listened in silence, feeling his heart sink with every detail. Lily Carter, he repeated the name in his mind. Somehow it felt familiar, though he couldn't remember where. Matthew continued hesitantly, "Sir, I have one last piece of information. It appears there was a fundraising campaign, but it had little reach. The community around the family is small, and they didn't achieve much." Ethan became thoughtful, remembering the words in the letter. Sophie, that girl who was just 8 years old, had not asked for money. She had asked for a miracle, help that transcended any monetary value. He had always considered that true strength lay in what he could build with his own hands, but that child made him question his own power. Wasting no time, Ethan told Matthew to schedule a hospital visit. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for or even what he could do, but he knew he needed to see Lily and understand what moved little Sophie so much. Hours later, Ethan arrived at the hospital. The environment was cold with the unmistakable smell of antiseptic. He followed Matthew into the hallway where Lily was admitted, feeling uncomfortable, as if he were invading a sacred space. In front of the door, he hesitated for a moment, and then he took a deep breath and entered. Upon entering the room, he saw a pale woman lying down with a tired but welcoming smile, even weakened. She had an aura of serenity. Beside him, sitting on a small chair with her legs dangling, was Sophie, who opened her eyes wide when she saw him. "Sophie," her mother smiled, surprised. "Is this the gentleman you spoke of? The one you gave the letter to?" Sophie just nodded, with a gleam of hope in her eyes. Ethan approached, and in that moment all his doubts disappeared. He didn't know exactly what he was going to say, but he knew he needed to be there. "Mrs. Carter," he began, "I received your daughter's letter, and I don't know exactly why, but something brought me here." Lily gave a weak but sincere smile. "Life is made of unexpected encounters, isn't it? Maybe my Sophie saw something in you that no one else sees." Ethan was speechless. He was used to contracts, negotiations, and pragmatism, but this moment was different. It was as if he was facing a mission that challenged everything he believed in. "I want to help in some way," he finally said, feeling that those words carried a weight he never imagined they would. Lily held Sophie's hand and looked at him gratefully. "The greatest help we can receive, sir, is not always financial, it is hope. The world sometimes hardens us so much that we forget that love and kindness are the greatest cures." Ethan felt his own defenses dissolving. He couldn't remember the last time he felt something so profound. In that moment he realized that it wasn't just Lily's health that needed healing, but something inside him as well. "I'll do my best to make sure you have what you need," he promised. "But more than that, I want you to know that I'm really here." When he left the room, he knew that this was just the beginning of a journey. Something had been awakened, and he felt that promise was not only for the Carter family, but also for himself. In the days following the hospital visit, Ethan found himself increasingly drawn into the story of Sophie and her mother, Lily. It was as if an invisible thread was pulling him towards them. He couldn't focus on business, investment charts, or even the high-level meetings that had once been the center of his life. Now, instead of thinking about numbers, his mind kept returning to that hospital room, to Sophie's hopeful look and Lily's serene smile. Ethan began visiting the hospital regularly. At first, he limited himself to talking briefly with Lily, listening to the stories Sophie told him about school, and closely monitoring the progress of the treatment. But little by little, a deeper connection emerged. Lily, who had always been an independent and energetic woman, now lived days of uncertainty and, even so, maintained an unshakable serenity and faith. On one of these visits, he arrived at the hospital and found Lily weaker than usual. The disease seemed to be advancing, and Sophie, who was at her mother's side, looked at Ethan with a mix of despair and hope. She believed he could do something beyond what he was already doing, that he somehow had a special power to change the situation. "Mr. Ethan," Sophie began, her voice breaking, "do you believe in miracles?" Ethan hesitated. He, who had always been a practical man, someone who only believed in what he could touch and see, didn't know what to answer. Miracles, for him, life was a game of effort and strategy, with no room for extraordinary events. Lily, upon hearing her daughter's question, smiled slightly and looked at Ethan with a deep look. "Perhaps the greatest miracle," she said, "is not in waiting for a magical cure, but in realizing the changes that adversity brings within us. Sometimes the miracle we hope for may not be the one we receive, but rather the one we receive that awakens in our hearts." Lily's words touched Ethan in an unexpected way. It was as if she were speaking directly to him, as if she knew the silent battle he was waging inside. He knew that for Sophie and Lily, hope for a miracle was essential, but for him those words were like a key to a door he had locked long ago. Ethan promised himself that he would do everything in his power to provide Lily with the best chance of treatment. But as he left the hospital that night, he realized he had made an even greater promise, a promise to his own heart, that he would finally make room for something beyond his mechanical routine. The next morning he decided to go further in helping her. After calling the best doctors and hospitals, looking for the most advanced treatment alternatives, Ethan decided to pay all the expenses without Lily knowing. "I didn't want her to feel indebted or pressured." He knew the greatest gift he could give that family was the peace of mind to focus on recovery without the burden of financial worries. That same day, Sophie found Ethan at the hospital reception, holding a small envelope in his hands. "Mr. Ethan," she said, offering him the envelope with an emotional look. "Mom and I wrote this for you." Inside the envelope, there was a simple note, but it carried an indescribable strength. "Mr. Ethan, we thank you not only for what you are doing for us, but also for believing. When someone believes, something magical happens, because the love that is put into actions brings light into even the darkest nights. May you know that regardless of whatever happens, you are already part of our miracle." Ethan felt a hot tear slide down his face. That man, who believed he had everything, felt for the first time that perhaps he was just beginning to understand what really mattered. With the note in his hands, he realized that somehow he was experiencing a miracle, not in Lily and Sophie's life, but in his own life. That moment taught him that miracles do happen, but they often come in the form of encounters that transform us from within. And then, as Sophie and Lily waited for a miracle of healing, Ethan discovered the miracle of being healed in his soul, of having his heart and life redirected towards something greater than he could imagine. The weeks passed, and Ethan became almost part of Sophie and Lily's routine at the hospital. He alternated between important meetings and regular visits to his mother and daughter, coming to feel like he was living two parallel lives. On the one hand, he was the meticulous businessman, the man who controlled every detail of his career. On the other, someone who was beginning to rediscover what it meant to truly care, open up, and even believe in something beyond yourself. But then one day, upon arriving at the hospital with a small bag of gifts he had picked out for Sophie, Ethan was surprised by unexpected news. Lily had suffered a serious complication during the night and was taken to the ICU. Sophie was in the waiting room, her eyes swollen from crying, clutching a teddy bear as if it were her only source of comfort. He sat next to her in silence, feeling a weight in his chest that he couldn't describe. Seeing Sophie so vulnerable, holding on to hope that her mother would survive, made him question everything. Why had fate placed that little girl in his path? Why was it that just when he was beginning to open his heart, life threatened to destroy her hope? "Sophie," he whispered as he placed his hand on her shoulder, "your mother is a strong woman. She has overcome so much. You will see that she will recover." Sophie nodded slowly, but Ethan could see the fear in her eyes. "Do you still believe in miracles, Mr. Ethan?" she asked, her voice breaking. He hesitated. For the first time, there was no answer at that moment. Ethan realized that as much money and power as he had, there were things that were far beyond his control. But he couldn't admit that to Sophie. He needed to be strong for her, needed to keep believing for both of them. Hours passed in that waiting room, until finally the doctor appeared in the hallway. His face was serious, and Ethan held Sophie's hand, fearing the worst. But to her surprise, the doctor delivered news that seemed like a glimmer of hope. "Lily is stable. It was a difficult night, but she responded to the treatment. Now we need to wait. Her condition is still delicate, but there are signs that it may improve." Ethan felt intense relief. Sophie sighed in gratitude as tears ran down her face. She looked at Ethan with a shy smile, as if he had somehow made this miracle happen. Over the next few days, something seemed to change in Ethan. He felt closer to Sophie and Lily, like they were family. He began to help them not only financially, but emotionally, offering them a constant and comforting presence. During one of the visits, Lily, who was still very weak, asked to speak to Ethan alone. He entered the room, sitting next to her. She looked at him tenderly, as if she saw beyond the layers of powerful and reserved man he showed to the world. "Thank you for everything, Ethan," she said, lightly holding his hand. "I know you're helping so much more than just money. You've brought peace to Sophie and made her believe that even when everything seems impossible, there is always a light." He felt Lily's words touch his heart deeply, and before he could respond, she added something that completely disarmed him. "Ethan, I don't know how much time I have left. I don't know if the treatment will cure me or if I'm just delaying the inevitable. But seeing the man you're becoming is one of the greatest miracles I've ever seen. There's something inside you that needs to be awakened. I don't know why God crossed our paths, but I believe that, in some way, He wanted you to rediscover what it is to truly love." He felt his heart sink when he heard those words. He, who had always hidden behind an image of strength and detachment, was now confronted by the idea that everything he sought, security, stability, power, did not bring him the true meaning of life he was looking for so much. Lily looked at him with one last request, with an almost silent hope. "Take care of my Sophie, if I can't be here for her anymore. She needs someone to show her the way, someone who truly loves her, and I know you have that inside you." With a shaky voice and teary eyes, Ethan nodded. It wasn't just any promise. It was something he felt deep in his soul, a commitment to someone who had shown him the power of vulnerability and unconditional love. Upon leaving Lily's room that night, Ethan realized that perhaps the true miracle was not the cure of an illness. Perhaps the true miracle was the awakening of a soul that had been asleep for so long. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between Ethan, Sophie, and Lily grew deeper than he ever imagined it could. In his life, he always believed that success lay in maintaining emotional distance and never allowing himself to be vulnerable. But now, next to that little girl and her mother, he saw himself changed. It was as if a part of his essence, long forgotten, was being reborn. One winter morning, Ethan received a call from the hospital. The doctor's voice was careful, full of regret. "Mr. Ethan, you'd better come. Lily is not well." He didn't think twice. He rushed to the hospital with a heavy heart and a pain that grew in his chest, a pain that he didn't know was possible to feel for someone he had known for such a short time. When he arrived at Lily's room, he found Sophie holding her mother's hand, tears silently falling down the girl's face. Lily was pale, but her eyes still shone with that serenity that Ethan never fully understood. Upon seeing Ethan, Lily smiled, a weak smile, but full of meaning. He approached her, holding her other hand, and felt like he was in one of the most important moments of his life. Lily took a deep breath and, with effort, said, "Ethan, thank you for everything, for being our hope when there was none left." He wanted to respond, to say that she had transformed his life much more than he transformed hers, but the words were lost. It was a moment of silent understanding, where words were unnecessary. Then Lily turned her face to Sophie with immense love in her eyes. "Sophie, my angel, Mr. Ethan will take care of you. Even when I can no longer, always remember, my daughter, that love is what keeps us alive, even beyond life. Trust and love, my little one." Sophie sobbed softly, and Ethan felt an indescribable tightness in his chest. He knew that farewell was inevitable, but nothing could prepare him for the pain of seeing a mother saying goodbye to her daughter. Lily closed her eyes, breathing deeply, as if she were at peace, as if her mission was complete. She whispered one last time, "The real miracle, Ethan, was you." With these words, she left, leaving a serene presence and an inexplicable strength that seemed to embrace everyone in the room. The days that followed were difficult. Sophie was left in Ethan's care, and he dedicated himself to giving her everything he could to ease her pain. He realized that now he was not just a guardian, but someone who had found a new purpose. He had promised Lily that he would take care of Sophie, and somehow he knew that this promise was the most important mission of his life. Over time, he began to share with Sophie stories about his own mother, about how she had taught him the value of effort and love. Sophie, little by little, found comfort in Ethan, and he, in his innocence and courage, found something he never expected: a family. Months later, Sophie wrote a letter to Ethan, a letter reminiscent of the first one she gave him on the street. Upon opening it, he read each word carefully, feeling his heart fill with silent joy. "Dear Mr. Ethan, I know you miss Mom just like I do, but I know she's watching over us, and she's happy we found each other. I wanted to tell you that you've become my miracle. Now, what I want most is for you to know how much I love you. Mom always told me that true love is the greatest strength in the world. I think now I understand what she meant." Ethan held the letter with a lump in his throat and a smile on his face. He, who had always believed that success lay in being untouchable and distant, now understood that true success lay in the love, connection, and compassion that Lily and Sophie had brought into his life. In that instant, he realized that Lily had planted the seed of true love in him, a seed that would bloom forever. He closed his eyes, feeling like he could see Lily smiling and at peace, proud of the man he had become. And so, the real miracle happened. It wasn't the cure Ethan had hoped for. It was the transformation of his own life, something he never imagined could happen. His life, once filled with empty achievements, was now filled with purpose and a love that he knew would never leave him again. Let's reflect together. What would you do if a child handed you a letter on the street? Would you make space for something that could transform your life? Are we sometimes guided to find people who bring true miracle into our lives? If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the power of unexpected encounters, leave your comments sharing your reflection. Subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of faith, healing, and love. And together, let's continue spreading these messages of hope. Who knows? The next miracle could be right next to you.